Hello and welcome to Group Chat. I am Justin Verrier, and joining me, as always, Rob Mahoney, Big Waz. Guys, I don't know if you saw this over the weekend, but they're giving out those presidential medals of freedom.
Yeah. Shout out to Denzel.
Which, yeah, I guess, first of all, I guess we just give them to elder statesmen celebrities at this point. It was like Anna Wintour. It was like Steve Martin. So if you're just a celebrity long enough, I guess you are a Medal of Freedom winner. I don't know what the qualifications are.
I was just proud of New York City's own Bronx native Ralph Lauren getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom, a true American hero and patriot. That was pretty dope for me.
It illuminated for me that I really, to your point, Justin, don't know the rules of who is allowed to get this honor or not. Like we're clearly not operating by like a knighthood system where you have to actually be an American in order to receive this particular presidential medal. But look, shout out to Bono, shout out to Jane Goodall. You know, they're doing good things out there. I just don't really understand what we're doing here.
Well, here's my question: like, if there are no qualifications, then how do we get Waz a Medal of Freedom at least in like 10 years from now? Maybe not this next presidential 10
years.
Well, you know, he's still in his 30s. I don't know if he's in the age range it seems like these people get it at. But I think he's in the running at the very least.
I guarantee you there is a group chat listener out there who will one day staff a presidential administration.
Yep. Wow.
And this thing is closer to happening than you guys even understand.
Well, I look forward to the day that the three of us get to storm, if not the Capitol, then the White House for Waz's celebration and his awarding of the medal.
Also, man, shouts to Joe Biden, because my BMF heads will note that noted notorious drug kingpin Big Meech's brother was pardoned by the Joe Biden administration after he's pardoning drug kingpins. You know, he's giving presidential freedoms medals to Hillary Clinton, you know, warmongering ass Hillary Clinton, whatever. It is what it is. All bets are off going forward. Let's go.
Is this why you've been boning up on Blue Bloods, just to like get familiar with the system, learn the inner workings of the judicial system in order to put yourself in position for this?
Blue Bloods doesn't really help me with national politics, but in terms of the hand wringing that's going on in New York City with the new congestion pricing, yeah, that's what I'm locking in on Blue Bloods for. Understanding New York City politics, y'all.
It's real boots on the ground stuff.
That's right.
All right, let's get to the matter of hand here. It's a special day on this podcast because we're talking about Jimmy Butler, and for no other reason. Over the weekend, it seemed like things just kind of popped off in a way that, like, I think was expected, but happened a little quicker than I thought. And so the timeline as we know it now, December 26th, Pat Riley issues a stern statement saying that the Heat will not trade Jimmy Butler. January 3rd, 8 days later, they're in the Jimmy Butler business yet again. They suspended Butler for 7 games. He'll actually be back mid-January, so it's actually kind of a weird in-between zone where he will be back before the deadline on February 6th. Waz, what do you think about this? You broke the news in our group chat for us. Are you surprised that this happened at this point? What's your general just like outlook on this?
It's not surprising. It's just the way that we got here. I think everybody has some egg on their face, if we're being honest here. One, there's no other way to frame this, but like Pat Riley has a very huge ego. And he's super old, and he understands the old way of dealing with disgruntled players and even stars. And I don't think it comports with modern realities on the ground. Like, there's a world in which Jimmy Butler comes out and essentially does a Paul George. He's on the last year of his deal. He can choose to opt in or he can opt out and be a free agent. He's a good soldier. He plays his ass off, makes an All-NBA third team, gets paid with somebody else next summer, or him and the Heat work out some deal where he opts in and blah, 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 whatever, right? Like, there's a world in which that happened. But you know a world that doesn't happen, where Pat Riley just takes a swipe at the guy last offseason for no freaking reason whatsoever. Like, he just literally just killed the guy in public for nothing. There was no reason to do that.
For no reason?
look, you can complain to Jimmy Butler about not being available, which, by the way, like if people remember what happened that last game that Jimmy played in, it was a nasty ass injury where a dude fell on his freaking leg. Like that wasn't somebody like, oh, I'm not playing, I'm load man. Like he sustained a serious injury, just playing his ass off.
Yeah.
And so he missed the playoffs. Like this idea that he wasn't on the court because of some, I don't know, was just crazy. I think Pat Riley, like the way he's carried this in public was a mistake. I don't think he needed to do this. Like Lawrence Frank didn't come out and destroy Paul George when it didn't work out an extension, right? Like he didn't, like, I feel like some of this stuff with Pat Riley is like all stick and no carrot. Like you didn't give him the extension. That's enough.
Remind me, did Jimmy say stuff on the bench, or like there was a sideline interview where he's like, oh, if I played, like we would have won, and he did the Instagram stuff with the Celtics, and so perhaps that was what he was reacting to. But Rob, to Waz's point, I mean, Pat Riley did this with LeBron, didn't work out. Seems like the tough love strategy is just not what players of this ilk really want to hear.
Completely. I think there's a larger conversation to be had about the Heat because, as we're alluding to, a lot of the stars who have come through there, things have ended really badly on the way out. Things even ended badly with Dwayne Wade before he ultimately circled back.
Mr. 305, Wade County.
Like, short of being Udonis Haslem, I don't know that there are a lot of players who have come through the Heat organization, and plenty have gotten contracts and made money and gone on to other stops, but like they get either kind of chewed up and spat out by the Heat machine, or they're stars who end up disgruntled by the end. And so this is an incredibly accomplished organization, a great developmental enterprise. Like they do a lot of things right. One of the best coaches in the world in Eric Spoelstra. I don't think anyone's going to argue with that, except maybe Jimmy Butler on his way out, kind of taking some snipes at the scheme. It's just a weird situation that the Heat find themselves in over and over and over. And I'm with you. I was like, they didn't handle this particularly well.
They didn't need to antagonize Jimmy Butler. Pat Riley didn't need to antagonize the guy in public, which also, sorry to cut you off, Rob.
Yeah.
I'm not saying what Jimmy's doing right now, where he's talking about maybe I don't think I could be happy here, and clearly not playing his hardest in the game. Like, I don't think that's right either. I think everybody has faults here, but I do think the way the Heat organization carried this is some old school mentality that doesn't jibe with the new realities.
I think that is largely true. I think the problem here is that the Heat are operating that way. Jimmy is clearly miffed. The elephant in the room with all this stuff is not even who hurt whose feelings, but who didn't get paid. And that's Jimmy Butler not getting the massive extension that he wanted. And the Heat, I think, somewhat understandably, being a little hesitant to give a guy at his point in his career, with all of the question marks, with all of this sort of drama that does tend to crop up around him, like, oh, here's $111 million over the next 2 years. That's a big ask for Jimmy Butler right now.
Yeah, the die seemingly was cast over the summer where Jimmy very much wanted an extension and the Heat very much didn't want to give it to him. In fact, they went out and gave Bam one instead of him in a very like showy way where it seemed like he was our guy. You are not the guy for us. And so this feels inevitable. Honestly, I've been thinking a lot about KD and Draymond in the wake of this, where it was like, assumed that KD would likely be out at the end of the year. But to basically come to that conclusion on both sides, whether they spoke it into existence or not, and then try to get through a season is impossible. Like there's an inevitability there. And if you all know it, it's hard to really work through the drudgery of the first couple months of a season and that not lead to a boil, especially as we've seen with Jimmy and Pat over time. These are two of the most hard-headed, aggressive people probably in all of basketball, at least in prominent positions. Like, so this was always going to happen. Like you can't just say like, we're going to get a divorce in a year, but we have to get through the vacation first. Like it's not going to happen like that. I give you like 6 months. These things like human behavior just really comes to a head. And I think that's what happened here.
Yeah. And I think people might say that Miami can take their time and blah, blah, blah. I don't agree with that. We have a guy in Jimmy Butler with a proven track record to be comfortable in chaos. He will be comfortable making their nice, tidy Heat culture into a chaos factory. And if you don't move him, he will happily opt into $52 more million this offseason. And we could do this. We could run this chaos back again while I collect these checks and make your organization a living hell. They got to move this guy.
It's a hostage crisis.
Period. Except the hostage is like, refuses to leave. He refuses to just opt out of his player option and just go do something maybe with the Nets or whatever. And I think, I think it's really telling that Jimmy's not like, oh, I have my preferred destinations, which, the stupid shit with the hair and the Suns is one thing, but he's obviously like, send me to Charlotte. I don't give a fuck. Watch me show you people how great I still am. I think he's highly motivated to prove these people wrong. But I just think this didn't have to happen this way. They could have moved his ass last summer and probably gotten some decent value for it. But they wanted to be stubborn and hard-headed, and I think everybody's paying the consequences for it.
And wanted to prove a point. Like, the Heat do a lot of things on principle for better and worse. And when they're going to the NBA Finals, we're all praising those things. And at these moments, I think we're rightly looking at them and saying, maybe you can't operate this way all the time in the modern NBA, as you're saying, Woz. Maybe this isn't the way to do things. And I think the whole Jimmy Butler dual hostage crisis that you're outlining is bumping straight up against all of these new rules that apply with an aproned NBA, where we may be moving out of sort of a trade request, trade demand era in general. Like, it's just going to get harder and harder to execute on that stuff with players who make this much money. And so that's where I may be a little more open-minded, Woz, to the idea of Jimmy Butler staring down that massive option and deciding at his age, and this is a guy who is not just like, he of course cares about $50 million. Everyone cares about $50 million. This is also a motherfucker who cares about winning and who cares about playing. And the idea of wasting one of the best basketball years that he has left in his career, which is a vanishingly small amount of time for a player at his stage, that may be too much to ask for him at this stage.
Yeah, I kind of also have like a bit of a tinge of sadness to all of this because Jimmy was front and center in the whole player empowerment. I'm going to force my way to this team and then to another team after that. And it just seems part of this is that he doesn't necessarily have the power element of it. One, because his play has fallen off in recent years. And so you have to wonder, like, which team is really going to go over their skis, like be beyond themselves and like trip over themselves in order to go and get Jimmy. And then two, Rob, I think you bring up a good point. Who actually has the means and like the ability to do so considering the constraints with the CBA? And so like I look at the list of teams that would realistically want to trade for Jimmy. And I have 5 down here. And that like eliminates all the second apron teams. It would be great, for instance, if the Timberwolves could like flip Julius Randle's contract and maybe like try to import Jimmy, bring him back, and let's see what happens, because that situation is boiling over in a way that we should talk about soon. But they can't. Second apron team, just going to be way too difficult because Jimmy makes almost $50 million. You can't aggregate contracts in order to get to that amount. They're out of the race. So I have 5 teams here. I'm curious if you guys have any more after I list this. I have the Suns first and foremost. The Warriors, despite the fact that they say that they're not actually in the mix, they're in the fucking mix. Nuggets, Grizzlies, Pistons. And if you were to say like how many of these I could see realistically happening, I'd say 2. I'd say Suns and Warriors. What do you think, Woz?
Yeah, I think both of those teams definitely have a Jimmy Butler need. I would say so do the Nuggets have a Jimmy Butler need. And I really do genuinely think a motivated Jimmy Butler could still be like a really dominant postseason player. I really truly believe that. For those stretches, like Jimmy at this point, we know doesn't really care about the regular season. Like, it is what it is. But I do think he's a gamer in the playoffs. And I think another team that was thrown out there to me when I was, talking to a couple of people, somebody threw out the Cavs, basically doing a Garland deal and basically making them a serious ass postseason team now. A team that definitely, would become a peer with the Celtics by doing something like that, because Garland is duplicative of what Donovan Mitchell does, and Jimmy would just add a whole new element that they don't currently possess. But, you're on a 72-win pace. You're not breaking up your team to bring the guy who's like burning down the fucking Heat organization right now.
Straight up.
That is just not a thing that teams do. It would take a lot of balls, quite frankly, to do something that bold. But yeah, I think the Warriors and the Suns are the obvious choices because of, how their particular seasons are going and the obvious need for somebody like Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, I think it's useful to kind of bucket them into those sorts of groups. The Warriors and the Suns are desperate enough where they have to think about it. They have to turn over rocks. They have to mull over what would we actually have to give up if you're the Warriors to get this done, or for the Suns, like who is going to take on Bradley Beal is effectively the question there. Because as Brian Windhorst reminded us recently, like the Heat have taken a look at Beal when he was up for trade last time and said, no thanks, we're good. They were not interested in taking back Bradley Beal. So even if Beal wanted to go there, and we should say Beal has a no trade clause, which complicates all of this too.
$50 million contract and a no trade clause.
Very complicated.
Can we talk about the Suns though? Because obviously they're having their own little bit of a drama situation where right before, I think Sunday night, Chris Haynes reported that they're switching up the starting lineup. Beal, Nurkic go to the bench, Dunn and Plumlee come to the starting lineup. And I have to say that was pretty suspicious. The timing of which, and I was already, my conspiracy theory brain was running because I'm like, man, it seems like the Suns are very clearly the obvious candidate, but there's no direct way for Jimmy to get there because of all the complications that we just laid out. I almost wondered if Jimmy blew up the situation, had that press conference in which he was like, I can't find joy here, which was like pretty targeted, specifically in order to grease the wheels so that he makes things so bad for the Heat that he can get his way to the Suns. And I almost wonder if the Suns are like, oh shit, you're doing that, let's do this on our side too. And everything becomes so toxic that they have to make a trade that the Beal, who probably holds the cards in this situation, does not want.
So 2025 is the year of mutual toxicity.
There you go. Yeah.
I mean, look, that is the glaring sign on the wall. Look, there are basketball reasons to move, I would say specifically Bradley Beal from the starting lineup to the bench. He's duplicative of what Booker and Durant do best. The lineups with Booker and Durant and Dunn overall, basically regardless of who you want to mix and match around them, have been pretty good. Like there's just a balance to that makes sense in terms of offense and defense. The bigs, respectfully, it doesn't matter whether you start Mason Plumlee or not. Maybe you could argue he's slightly less flimsy than Yusuf Nurkic in some ways. Neither of those guys is going to solve your problems. But part of the value here, if we're all being honest about it, is Bradley Beal being a little less enthused about his situation to the point where he may look at some moves that for him could be lateral, for him could be a slight downgrade, for him could be maybe a market he's not thrilled about moving to, and say, you know what, at least there, I'm going to be able to do my thing and play my game. And that maybe that's a team that's going to value me a little more than being the sixth man of the Phoenix Suns.
Yeah, the other part of this is that the Suns...
Are we going to talk about the cat that's walking in front of Watts' face right now?
Jerk, I moved the freaking computer closer to the ledge of the desk so that she doesn't walk over it, but then she contorted herself to do it anyway. Just, Mimi the jerk.
Real Jimmy Butler energy from Mimi today.
Yes,
that's right.
Facts.
Can we get her
Disrespecting
traded?
the boss.
You're trying to trade Mimi? It's fucked up.
The Heat are also in a situation where they can't really bottom out because they owe this pick to the Thunder as a result of redoing the pick that they owed originally. I believe it was the Clippers, or no, it was the Sixers, and then it went to the Clippers. It's a whole saga, some of these draft picks nowadays. So like, and they also have the type of players where you can't fully bottom out. Bam, Hero, whatever you bring in afterward, that's their core. You almost want like a soft reboot. And so I guess the question is does Beal make any sense here? Is there any world where you're like, you could reimagine him and you just have a better kumbaya spirit and you just kind of make do with what you have?
No, he's bad. He's not a good player anymore. He's just not. Just the idea that around this team, he can't find a way to be a contributing starter, where he's not asked to be anybody's version of the man. He's just asked to support what KD and Devin Booker do. And he can't do it. And he's being paid $50 million.
Yeah.
No, he's just not good.
I think he can't do it at a star level. I think overall he's been fine. I think he's played something like 80-ish games overall with the Suns so far. It hasn't been an abject disaster, but I don't know how you could argue that it's gone well. He hasn't found a way to fit and pop. He's fit in and he can space the floor. He can be your third option running a pick and roll. All of that stuff is well and good. Like he's overqualified for that, but he's not who reputationally speaking, Bradley Beal would suggest that he's capable of being.
But also, I would submit if Bradley Beal's deal was done this summer, meaning it could be just as if like they just shed Jimmy's salary this summer, then you could see yourself talking like, whatever, this guy's an imperfect player. But you know what? We're done with him. We're done with Jimmy. The summer of 2025, life goes on. We get to keep being the Miami Heat. This guy has 2 more years left on his deal after this one. And a no trade clause. Like, no.
And whatever concerns you may have about his fit with the Suns, like Tyler Hero has just been flat out significantly better than Bradley Beal. And they have very similar skill sets at the end of the day. So whatever problems, Devin Booker and Bradley Beal have coexisting, Tyler Hero is going to have the same thing.
Yeah, I could see it if you could dump Terry Rozier as a part of it. I could see it if there were multiple picks coming back, so they were almost paying you for Beal's contract in addition to taking Butler.
Picks.
But the Suns don't have anything, and this is the problem with the new CBA. It's just impossible for anything to get done. And so I agree with you guys. It seems highly unlikely, but it does seem like these two teams are trying to make it work. God bless them as much as they possibly can. Yeah. And so if it's not the Suns, then who is it? Because the Warriors are out of the market. Allegedly, or at least they're making a big show of it. Kuminga is out 3 weeks. I agree that like he probably makes the most sense there. I don't know if he changes much with Golden State, the way that the season is going. They're an absolute mess at this point.
Especially if they have to give up Wiggins and Kuminga, which salary-wise they basically would have to do unless they give up Draymond. That's a lot of good wing depth for what the Warriors have and need. And Jimmy Butler at his best can be far better than either of those guys, but they need rotation ballast. They need like good, consistent, regular season defense. And is Jimmy Butler gonna be that? I don't know.
I can't see it. I just think Miami, when they do move Jimmy, I think it's just gonna be to some NBA backwater like Charlotte or Detroit or something that just has nothing going for it, wants to take a swing on an established star and do something different within the organization and the culture, perhaps like, I don't know, getting Miles Bridges out of there or something like that. Like something like that I could see happening. I don't see him going to a real team at this point. And it's sad because Jimmy Butler in the postseason has provided some of the coolest moments in the past 6 years, man. Remember when he was like exhausted in the bubble and just like giving it his all against the Lakers and LeBron, willing this team to a Denver Nuggets finals matchup, conference finals all over the place. Like they've accomplished so much, overachieved like a mother. Aside from Bam, ain't been no all-stars or like real players. Like there've been, marginal guys like Max Strus and Gabe Vincent and, the like who have overachieved for who they are coming into the league. Duncan Robinson, these guys have overachieved, but like it's not as if Miami has been aggressive and pulling the trigger and getting these great players in. They whiffed on the Damian Lillard situation, the years back. Like they haven't been able to do anything major in the Jimmy years. Like nobody thought this team was going to the NBA finals or conference finals the years that they did it. It was because Jimmy Butler was incredible. Yeah. And so, I can understand why Jimmy would think like, yo, I should be rewarded for the shit that I've done here.
This is one of those cases where even though we were saying no one has covered themselves in glory, everyone is kind of right. Like sure. Jimmy Butler is right to be frustrated with his current circumstances, financially and otherwise. The Heat are right to be fed up of Jimmy Butler's bullshit. Everyone who's out there telling you that Jimmy Butler is one of the biggest gamers in the league and can drag teams to the NBA Finals are clearly empirically right. And everyone's saying that Jimmy Butler is maybe not worth all of the trouble for a lot of teams are absolutely right too.
Like case at this point, yeah.
It's just a lot to deal with, and that's where like the Cavs example is a great one. Not just in terms of does it make sense to trade someone, a player as good and promising as Darius Garland for all the problems that Jimmy would bring with him in the door, but like, does he fit with your team? He isn't a great shooter, and so if you're a team that's already a little compromised for spacing, he might only exacerbate that. So, and if you're a shooting star like the Cavs have been this season, if you're a team like the Grizzlies, who ostensibly could use Jimmy Butler on the wing, but would have to give up some pretty significant stuff to do it, I would imagine. It's just really hard to talk yourself into taking that kind of leap.
Yeah, the Grizzlies option is interesting because based on their conversations with the Nets, you would think that they would be in the market for a bit of a wing. They didn't get Dorian Finney-Smith. He ultimately went to the Lakers. They could be in the Cam Johnson sweepstakes. I like Cam Johnson for them, although it seems like that's becoming a bit of a thick race. I think every team that has title aspirations wants Cam Johnson. I'm a little worried about Jimmy in a lot of regards. One, I do think he fits the culture, I would say, would really like appeal to that fan base who has spent many a year cheering on Tony Allen and those sorts of guys. Unfortunately, like if you're looking at the final form of this team, it's going to have Ja and Zach Edey there. And so can you sacrifice the spacing by putting Jimmy in that third spot, especially when you have such like a plug and play guy like Jalen Wells, who's been performing well? I get that he's a rookie. You might not want to just trust him wholeheartedly. Like that to me seems like a really weird mix of players. Even though that Jimmy does kind of overextend himself in the playoffs and goes beyond the numbers, I wouldn't do that if you're the Grizzlies. Rob, do you like that as an option for them?
I think it depends somewhat on the way that this Jimmy Butler sweepstakes takes shape. Like there's a version of this where the Heat ultimately settle for something that's more like an appetizer sampler of decent role players and a couple of picks.
And a moose-boosh.
A little amuse-bouche, yeah. And that's where it's like, if you are the Heat, does a Brandon Clark, Marcus Smart, Luke Kennard kind of trade package move you at all? Like, I don't know why it necessarily would, given everything that they need to reset in a post-Jimmy era. But what are you getting? Like, I'm just not so convinced that there's going to be even a prospect as promising as Jonathan Kuminga at the center of what ultimately the Jimmy Butler return is. It could be very wrong about that. I think Memphis is in a position where they have the salaries to make that work. Plus they have all of their own like full complement of first round picks if they wanted to try to grease the wheels on something larger, not even going straight to the Heat, but incorporating a third or even a potentially fourth team. Like those are the mechanisms that get things moving when you have all of those draft assets at your disposal, in addition to good players on decent contracts that can add up to something that can like feasibly make the math work. I will say this, like if there's a star involved in a Jimmy Butler trade for the Grizzlies, I don't like it. And hands down, if anyone out there is in the trade machine trying to plug Jaren Jackson Jr. in there, stop, leave,
that's a tough
outside. That is simply not happening and cannot happen.
I think the Heat are looking at clearing their books and potentially getting a pick. Like, especially when you're out there, both sides saying like neither of us want to be in business with each other, like your leverage dissipates very quickly.
I mean, the Heat statement is basically like, this guy stinks. We'd love to trade him. I don't know why anybody would want him. Like it's nuts.
He's a cancer. We don't even want him in our locker room for these next 7 games because he's just been an asshole. The specific reason why they suspended him was conduct detrimental to the team over the course of the season, and particularly the last 7 weeks. It's a real like, can you believe this fucking guy?
Yeah,
we just can't even have him in the building right now.
Well, but look what happened when he's not in the building. They lost by like 30 to the Jazz.
Oh my God.
Yeah, y'all not really like that.
Pistons are kind of a dark horse team. Honestly, they've performed pretty well, even in light of the Ivy injury. They're on a 3-game winning streak right now. They have performed pretty well over the past, like, I would say month plus of the season. I like it for the cosmic, just like kismet or irony of having to trade Tobias Harris for Jimmy Butler.
Wow.
After not being willing to get rid of Tobias and sending Jimmy out of Philly. Does that make any sense?
I think a motivated Jimmy playing with a fire under his ass definitely makes this team like they're going to the playoffs in the East. I think they're going to the play-in no matter what, it feels like at this point, the way they've been playing recently. But I think bringing Jimmy in hyper motivated, I think it would make them materially better. Now, what does that ultimately mean? Like, is it a 7 seed and get smoked in the first round? Cool. Isn't that what Miami does every year anyway? But like, I think it would make them materially better. I really do. I think Jimmy is now out for blood and has a point to prove about the kind of player that he actually is and why he was deserving of an extension and why he is a special talent. I think he's like going to be highly, highly motivated to prove that at his next stop.
I like it from that perspective. I think those are the sorts of teams we're going to end up talking about, are the ones who are desperate for some sort of modest improvement, desperate for some legitimacy, right? Like teams that have been in extended rebuilds because of injuries or just like weird draft picks that didn't pan out, find themselves now in the room saying, why not take a year or two of Jimmy Butler basketball and see what it can do for us? And frankly, if you are the younger elements of the Pistons core, I think there's a lot of guys on that team who could benefit from playing with a Jimmy Butler. Like the fast tracking you could get Jalen Duren playing with Jimmy Butler, I think is a meaningful thing just in terms of like overall intensity and commitment and consistency. Like an engaged version of Jimmy actually is helpful to some young players. Maybe not Karl Towns and Andrew Wiggins once upon a time, but maybe for the young Pistons.
Yeah, Jalen Duren just completely fell off. And it does seem
year.
Like motivational, like it just lacks physicality sort of thing, because it's not like his skill set is dissipated. It's really just like rolling hard to the rim and playing defense. I kind of like that, even if you look at it as like a stopgap for until Jaden Ivey comes back, because you'd assume that injury probably lingers into early next season at the very least. Just like kind of making something of the season. I honestly like Jimmy the most as like a 1 year plus sort of just like ballast, almost like right our ship, do what you can this year, and then we'll figure things out down the road. Of course, Jimmy probably is thinking more about the extension, so that probably muddles things, but we'll see. I mean, Denver, the last team on the board here, probably makes sense just in terms of motivations for both parties. I don't see it. Like a lot of what the Nuggets are going to do means getting rid of MPJ. I just think it's selling incredibly low on a guy that could be pretty good for a lot of different teams.
And frankly, has been quite good lately, especially. Like MPJ's been really important to them.
MPJ at his best is half the player Jimmy Butler is.
I don't disagree, but they're another team where it's like, who is shooting a 3-pointer other than Nikola Jokic?
Like, Westbrook is closing. Yeah. Westbrook is in your closing lineup.
Westbrook's like their third most important player.
You got Aaron Gordon out there.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Jimmy, like, I love Jimmy, but it just makes it the Lego pieces is just the puzzle of like competence in your biggest games becomes so weird now. If you do the MPJ thing, I've been out on MPJ for a minute now. And I do still think very highly of Jimmy and what like he's capable of doing when he's dialed in. I just think the math starts to get so freaking wonky, man, when you're going up against OKC, who's willing to launch 50, 80 threes a game against you. It's just tough.
And so that's why I think the Suns are the most likely scenario, and probably why we're in this situation. Who actually, this is a question I have on the docket here. Who has it worse this year? Is it the Suns, the Heat, let's throw in the Warriors, and the Nuggets? Like, which team is the saddest to you this year?
I would say the Warriors. And it's because
they tasted glory. They had 2 wonderful weeks of Buddy Hield, and now they're in the doldrums.
It's not even just that. It's like they want to, like, you could tell they would like to honor Steph's remaining prime, but they just don't have the stomach for it, and they just don't want to do something drastic. Something that, when Steph is inevitably finished and Draymond is done, where they're holding the check and holding the bag. Like, that's why I think it's the saddest. Like, spiritually, I think the Lakers are like, we should be on, like, trying to get superstars and all of this and, like, trying to do this for Steph. But, like, 2028 is right there. We can't just throw that in the trash, can we?
A presidential term away.
And so that's what I think. That's why I think the Warriors thing is the saddest, because Steph is the greatest thing that's ever happened to this franchise by far. And I think he should be honored with, whatever it takes to make a competitive product out there. But I think logically, the people who will own this team for the next 3, 4, 5 decades being like, look, we want to take a long-term, approach to how we're doing this, and trading assets and all the young guys and all of this stuff to bring in, temporary help for Steph just doesn't jive with that.
I think so long as the Warriors have Steph, they can draft off vibes to a degree of all the history. Like, so long as you can go to a Warriors game and show up in your number 30 jersey, like there is a psychic value to that experience. If you're the Phoenix Suns and you have the most expensive roster in basketball and you're at this point a couple games under 500 and the vibes are horrendous, like they're consistently bad to the point that you are benching $50 million players, I don't know that it gets a lot worse than that. Like, I mean, it gets worse than that if you're like last year's Pistons, right? Like there's levels to this stuff, but to be thinking you're competing for something. And I was among the people out here in the preseason saying, I think this could kind of work. Like, I think the outline of the Suns roster could maybe work.
The Bud effect.
The Bud effect, the Tyus Jones effect. Like, I was buying into that stuff, and it just has not moved the needle in a meaningful enough way to outweigh everything else that drags down the Suns right now. And that is a very expensive, both in terms of money and in terms of all of the assets and picks that went out the door to make this possible. That's a very expensive lesson to learn.
The Suns are currently 15-18, sandwiched in 12th place between the Sacramento Kings, who we've talked about have been an absolute disaster this season.
They've already fired a coach. Yeah.
They're on a 4-game winning streak, though. We should say the Kings are back.
I know the Kings have been playing pretty feistily, and the Blazers, who are actively rebuilding. So it's not great. What's funny is like whenever I hear about like Mikal Bridges and like how much Cam Johnson is wanted, I'm just like, oh, you could have just been fine. You could have just not done the KD trade and just found the next great superstar in order to bring him into the mix, or just like gone along and been a very good team and just like steadily brought along draft picks to supplement what you had, which was the core of an NBA fucking finals team. It's just like, it's bizarre to the point where Nurk now, whom they dealt Ayton with for like nothing, just to get Nurk in there to try to solve the situation, is one of the worst centers in the NBA. And you can't even trade him for instance, Nikola Vucevic, even though that works on paper in the NBA. So like the contracts match in a way that you could trade them straight up, but you can't because you're in the second apron and you can't trade like whatever. It has to be like within $1 or something in order to do it. They can't even do that. This is one of the worst situations in basketball, I think.
Bad.
In the past decade or two. This is like old school bad. This is like Charlotte Bobcats level bad, where they just like wanted to play fantasy basketball and it just didn't work out.
Yeah, and once again, I've said this a trillion times on this show, like KD, Hall of Famer, wonderful player, all of that stuff. He is not a leader of men. He is not going to be the glue that keeps a messy situation held together. He is not going to lift a finger in that regard. He's just going to show up and drop 28. That's it. That's it, y'all. Nothing more, nothing less.
Bad choice in friends.
Extremely tough. Meanwhile, Chris Paul's Spurs look pretty good.
Yeah.
You know?
CP.
Suns legend Chris Paul off to greener pastures yet again.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, like, I think Chris Paul can play 2 to 3 more years, just like being a 15-minute a game guy on second units and basically just being the daycare employee, like overseeing and like managing some of your upcoming young talent. Like, could he play next year in Detroit and just like run their second unit and show them how to play basketball? Like, Chris Paul has been awesome this season for the Spurs. Let's actually talk about the Spurs and Denver, who played this weekend in one of probably the only interesting back-to-back series, regular season series.
Yeah. How did you feel
NBA
about this,
history?
Justin? As you have spoken out in the past about
Justin has spoken out against the baseball sort of series where you get 2 straight home games of the same team.
But this
was a home and home. Yeah.
How do you feel about the home and home though?
I feel mixed. One, because they were both good games, probably some of the better games we've seen all year. 2, I liked that at the very least the Spurs brought out those light blue old school uniforms. Those are probably one of the best uniforms in the league, and so like to have that difference of aesthetics was a little bit nice. But as good as like the matchup was between Wemby and Jokic, and to see it back to back and see him like go after each other, I would have rather seen this later in the year. I would have rather them had like a month or two, like maybe Denver makes a trade, maybe they're better. We get to see Wemby with another month or two, and it seems like he picks up something new every month or two. Like that still would have been better. So as good as this was, I still think it's the bullshit format. It makes for good pod fodder though, because then we could be like, oh, they played 2 games together. Let's talk about it on Monday's pod.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. And again, two of the
revelatory games.
Two revelatory games as far as like a contained stretch, just like one of the best contained matchups of the season. Like I just love watching those two guys go up against each other. So I agree with you. If you can spread it out, all the better. Like that's wonderful. But I'm not going to argue with getting a back-to-back of Wemby and Jokic trying to figure each other out. And specifically, like Wemby is maybe the only guy in the league who forces Jokic to play differently, who actually pushes him out of his pace and his element and his comfort zone. I love watching that, and we just don't get enough chances to do it.
Yeah, Wemby was incredible. A couple of things from this weekend. Just the words that Nikola Jokic shared about Wemby was, I thought, just so cool. He was so high in his praise of this kid, which I thought was legitimately dope. And you could tell he was being genuine. And then when you watch the games, like, I haven't seen somebody make this singularly. Like, I think what Minnesota did in the playoffs was like in tandem of 3 guys, 3 pigs working in tandem to make Jokic's life miserable. That was impressive. Wemby was doing it by himself, essentially, and he was making Jokic work, okay? Like, this is the hardest I've seen Jokic work in a minute, to the point where he's turning the ball over at the end of game 1 of this home and home because he's about to get his freaking soundboard shuffle blocked, and he just threw the rock away. Like, that's not something we saw. Now, in game 2, because Jokic is Jokic, he made his crunch time adjustments. He was like, oh, okay, this guy's still fucking unstoppable in crunch time and makes every right choice, every right read, and it's ridiculous. But that game 1, that was a revelation. Like, I'm sorry, he didn't know what the hell to do.
Yeah.
And it was because Wemby is such a singular problem on defense. And so the defense was out of this world. He's on his way to Defensive Player of the Year. All 3 of us picked him to do so. I think even having picked him, I'm still impressed by what he's doing. But then offensively in game 1, what I loved, man, he got his ass away from the 3-point line, only took 6 threes. I love that. Get your ass closer to the basket. Beat these little fucking wings up who want to guard you. Be a man. That's what he did in game 1. Game 2, he went back to shooting a bunch of freaking threes. Whatever. It's a nitpick. He was excellent. He was awesome, man.
I'm looking forward to Waz's be a man pivot into being like a Jordan Peterson style influencer. I think we got a track here.
Listen, that was my like sort of take on Mike Gundy. I'm a man, I'm 40.
Okay, that's better.
This is a be a man, even though you're only 22 years old, type of situation.
But the 3-ball does look good, I have to say. And that was one of the things that jumped out to me, especially in that first game, is like, with how much confidence and how quickly he's putting them up at this point. He had that stretch late in the game where he was like, I would say like 2 to 3 normal human-sized steps out of the 3-point line, and he just put it up without hesitation. And then he went, I think in the very next possession, into a step back. He got it on off of one of those guards. Just the way that he's now taking those with confidence in the flow of the game, and really that like nobody thinks nothing of it. Like none of his teammates are really, if anything, they're feeding those shots rather than like being miffed by him taking so many of them. And then the defensive part of it, Waz was right, because it's so wild watching him close out on shooters because he doesn't need to run or sprint into it. Like he doesn't hard close, he soft closes because he knows his length can make up so much of the difference. And like, I was just thinking about like what an advantage that is, because he's basically covering the length of like the basket to the 3-point line in like 1 to 2 like hesitant steps, because he knows that he can get his hand in the mix there, especially against Jokic, who, as we know, like moonballs these shots. And like takes these like unreal launch angles. It's just like that combination is just impossible to really
that
deal with.
Last jump shot he made basically at the foul line extended,
that was hilarious,
was insanity.
Scraped the bottom of the Jumbotron on its way down.
Nuts.
Like that was crazy shot from Jokic, crazy execution from Jokic. And as we're kind of talking around, it's difficult for a player, the best player in the league, is having a hard time dealing with Victor Wembanyama. Is having to consciously shift how he's trying to approach the game. You could see when Wemby got in foul trouble, it was like, okay, Zach Collins, we gotta grill these minutes against Zach Collins to even out kind of the leverage in this game. But I thought what was interesting too about Jokic shooting so much, he took 36 shots and 35 shots in these 2 games. Absolutely has to for where the Nuggets are right now in a lot of different ways in a lot of these games. But those aren't just up there with the most shots that he's taken this season. They're up there with the most shots he's taken ever in his career. That tells me, yes, that he's trying to take advantage of the Zach Collins minutes and things like that. He's hyper aggressive. It also tells me that he's looking around at his teammates and saying, I'm having this trouble with Victor. How can I expect Russell Westbrook and Jamal Murray, and basically anyone who isn't Michael Porter Jr. also moonballing threes from the perimeter to do anything against this guy? And so he does play more physically against Wemby. You do see him rushing. You do see him putting an extra shoulder into him to try to create a little more space around the basket. And sometimes he still gets blocked anyway. But he does have to be that aggressive in this matchup, and it's fascinating to watch.
Yeah, the Jokic test, I think, is an important one because I think you're right. Just to see Jokic pay credence to what Wemby is doing and having to step up is really important. And Wemby passing that is a big part of his trajectory. Honestly, though, I'll probably remember this game for what Wemby did to Russ, which was basically tell him to fuck off multiple times. Russ is a pretty scary figure, especially for, foreign players, because God forbid some of these American-born players ever give them the benefit of the doubt, but also younger players, because he's a snarly motherfucker who's going to go up at you at any point. And to see Wemby basically be like, don't fucking grab me while you're following me, just don't do that, don't go to the head. And then when Russ tries to do the pat off, Wemby actually pats him back. I'm like, hell yeah. That is the competitive spirit that we love to see.
You are a guy who would appreciate a pat off. I could see you being a big I'm not touching you, I'm just putting my hand an inch away from your face, with a sibling kind of rivalry. I could see that for you, Justin.
You know where he got that from? Chris Paul, who was the ultimate don't sun me in any situation. Do not come close to my head.
Don't touch my head.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's the benefit of being Wemby. You will never be sunned. No one could ever do that to you.
That's true.
Yeah, it's dope to see that, and all indications. Again, I've never personally met Wembanyama. You talk to people close to the situation, is that he does have that maniac, competitive fire spirit, win at all costs, want to rip people's heads off, wants to be the best. He has that intangible within him, man. This is not some guy who, a Lamar Odom or Pau Gasol who were just Kobe had to make me play hard. That's not Wemby. Wemby wants to kill people stepping onto the court. He's holding his teammates accountable, hold himself accountable. That's, to me, is one of the most exciting parts about this, is that he's a self-starter, a self-motivator. And Russell Westbrook, I'm sorry, bro. You're not going to punk me. You're not I'm here to kill people. Sorry.
I think it's worth noting with Russ, too, not only is he as surly as you mentioned, JV, but he is a guy who, if you are Victor's age, Russ has been a huge deal.
He's a hero, yeah.
He has been a huge deal in the NBA landscape. This is the era of players now who grew up watching his MVP season and his all-out, balls-out, post-KD era. That's a guy you don't take lightly, even knowing kind of what the last few years of his career have been like and what some of the situations and the way they've sort of petered out. He's still a ball out of a cannon every night out. And he is still a guy you don't want to mess with in certain ways.
Yeah. Stephon Castle doesn't need to run through Wemby's chest in a NBA Cup game or what is it? The EuroLeague finals sort of games. What am I reaching for? It's
Are you reaching for the Kobe 08 versus Pau? Is that what you're reaching for?
Yeah.
First play of the game.
World Cup games is what I was reaching for. Yeah. So we don't need any of that. Wemby's got that going for him. My biggest takeaway from this as a result of all of this is that the Spurs should not rush the process. And so I think there's been talk about maybe De'Aaron Fox being in the mix for him. And I think De'Aaron Fox would be a great fit.
Great compliment
in theory,
to Wemby.
Just the competitive edge. He would be able to step up as a guard complement to Wemby in sort of these high leverage situations right now. It was Devin Vassell in that second game. Did okay, but you'd probably rather have De'Aaron Fox, who's gone toe to toe with Steph Curry in a first round playoff series as opposed to Vassell. But everything is just built in San Antonio as an incubator for Wemby. And And you could just see, even in between like the start of the season and now, and even like a month or two and now, just the amount of growth he's made. And like, I'm not touching that. I'm not disrupting what is basically an entire organization built to foster this one guy and make the optimal contacts for this guy. You bring in Chris Paul, you bring in Harrison Barnes, veterans who have paid dividends and just like stabilize things in order to feature him. Even like some of the young guys, they just don't step on Wemby in a way that a veteran with preconceived notions about how he wants to play and how he wants to go about things isn't going to do. And so like, I like Fox as a fit. I think he would be great there. I just don't want to disrupt the Wemby growth process. And I would hope that the Spurs, and they probably will do this, go through the season and then maybe think about it in the offseason or even later on.
Well, you're not turning this thing into a pressure cooker either, which I think is so important. Like the way we talk about the Spurs versus the way we talk about, say, the Minnesota Timberwolves. That's a team that drastically accelerated its timeline despite how young Ant still is. And as a result, we look at Mike Conley and we're like, this guy looks unplayable in some of these games. Is what Mike Conley and what Chris Paul contribute of radically different quality or worlds? No, like they're both caretaker point guards in dramatically different situations. I think Chris Paul's able to engineer more than Conley is, in part because of his role, but it eases the load on everybody, including Wemby. Like right now, Victor Wembanyama is learning how to exploit those guys, little guys in the post, like Waz is saying. That's one thing I love about this sort of like home and home or whatever kind of back-to-back format you have against teams. You see him learning game over game how to take Russ on the block, how to take Peyton Watson on the block a little bit, although Peyton Watson really acclimated himself pretty well defensively, we should say, in that matchup. I thought he did a great job.
Yeah.
But I love seeing that growth from Victor Wembanyama of, okay, not just how do I do this in general, but how do I do this against specific personnel? At this point, he's a little loose with his passing sometimes. He does settle for some shots over the top because he can get to them so easily. But you notice kind of over the course of this season, Victor settling into a real comfort zone in that like free throw line extended elbow kind of pull-up area. And if he's doing that right now, that's found money. If he's doing that when you are expecting to be the number 3 seed because you traded for De'Aaron Fox, everything feels a little bit more charged in a way that I don't know is productive to the enterprise.
I think the Ant example is an interesting one too, because, you know, they accelerated the timeline with the Ant situation by bringing Rudy Gobert in and Conley and all of that stuff. And they end up getting to a conference finals, but then consciously decelerate. They trade their second best player, make themselves materially worse for financial reasons. And I think we see Ant is like frustrated by the clear and obvious step back that the Wolves have taken in the Western Conference pecking order. And I think that's what De'Aaron Fox would be. I think that it'd be two things. It'd be one, I think you're getting Wemby into bigger games faster. You know, making him taste playoffs, actual competitive series, playing in the biggest moments faster. But then that becomes the standard for what he wants and how he thinks things should be going. And so you wonder if they're just like, yo, we'll do this incrementally, take it step by step. And when Wemby gets into big games, like it'll be great. But we don't need to rush it. Me personally, I just want to see this guy on the biggest stages as soon as we can, you know, and I can understand why the Spurs would be like, look, man, organizationally, we got time to take here.
I would also say, as a fan of this whole experience, like, this is the best, period. It's like there are expectations coming, but they're not necessarily weighing on anything he's doing. And so it's all found money. It's like he's over exceeding what you would probably previously expect because he's not human. He just does things that like regular players cannot do. And so like, just watching the growth process day to day, like week to week, it's just been a hell of a ride. Have you guys looked at the Wemby MVP odds lately? I'm here on FanDuel. He's plus 10,000. What do you think?
Are you ready? You ready to snatch that up?
No. Well, here's the thing.
Is that an official JV minted pick? Wemby for MVP?
No, I don't want to mess with my Spurs play-in bet, which I feel pretty good about these days.
It's looking quite good.
I hope you guys are like searching out berets.
Just relax. Just relax.
Well, I almost wonder, should I double down and go with Wemby on the top 5 MVP ballot? Because I think he's got a shot here, if only because like the games played, the 65 game rule now these days
is gonna
might just like chop some guys' legs off. Yeah, like so. I think very clearly Jokic, Giannis, Shea, in some order, is your top three. Probably going to be that at the end if they play enough games.
Shea's
Tatum will be on there. I think Mitchell almost certainly will be in the mix, if only to give credence to what the Cavs are doing, kind of give a tip of the hat to him. And then it's like Brunson, Cat, maybe. I think Wemby's right in the mix. So if anything, he's like right on the edge of 5, that if any of those guys miss the mark, he's at 5. So I think there are good odds for that.
I think if there were any justice in the world, and I say this as a voter often, if people voted on MVP as a holistic basketball award, if we're giving Wemby Defensive Player of the Year at the end of this season, and he's a really good offensive player too, he's deserving of MVP consideration, point blank. But the way MVP is often awarded is who is the best offensive player in the league. At least that's the way a lot of voters lean and vote. And that is the tiebreaker in almost all cases.
Should be. Offense is harder than defense.
I agree with you. He's also the star of their offense.
Yes.
And not the star on the level of Nikola Jokic. I think this matchup illuminates some of the differences between them. Like, one of these guys is putting up 40s and is doing it while orchestrating everything around him, while picking out every individual matchup to attack. Wemby is doing stuff we've never seen before. And that makes it hard to contextualize sometimes. It makes it hard to understand how many threes he should be taking. Is he in the right offensive role? Is he doing everything he can and should do? And what is that worth against guys like Donovan Mitchell and Karl Anthony Towns, like these really established stars who we have a better understanding of? I think all of that kind of weighs against him in some certain ways. But based on what he's done so far, he's deserving of that consideration. I think the Spurs are probably not going to be good enough to get him into the actual MVP running, but could he get on the ballot? I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah. We'll give him best original screenplay.
That's
which is what we do. We do for the up and comers.
The indie favorite.
Can't get best director. No shot.
He'll get defensive player of the year, maybe second team All NBA. I would assume second team All NBA because we're chopping up or we're going positionless nowadays. Yep. So pretty good. In other news over the weekend, Kawhi, he's back. I don't know, Waz, is LA a buzz with Kawhi making his return after 253 days on the sidelines?
Is LA a buzz? Not to
a gag, perhaps?
Not that I could see.
A gag?
Yeah.
Not that I could notice. I actually, because Kawhi came back on Saturday, I actually saw somebody, a friend of mine, Saturday after the Clippers game. They mentioned being at the game, said nothing about Kawhi's return. So, yeah, I don't think anybody is a buzz that a guy who just basically never stays on the floor finally came back for one freaking game. Like, I think, you know, if he gets a nice little streak of quality basketball going, people will get excited again. I'm not going to let myself be excited for anything Kawhi related because, like, I just don't believe in his ability to stay on the floor. But it's nice for now while he's here.
You're not even going to get excited about the extensive New Balance rollout for his return?
It's just, come on.
Did you see he has like some movie coming out or something that he dropped at the post-game press conference?
Yeah, he teased it. I guess there was some extensive production around this whole like fishing conceit or something. I don't know what's going on.
Jesus.
Can't say I'm super interested in that part of things. I wish Kawhi Leonard well in all of his business endeavors.
Athlete executive produced media. Boy, oh boy.
Yeah, I have to say I thought it was a fine return, which I guess is what you can expect after you've been off for damn near a year at this point.
Crazy.
Moved a little bit more rigor mortisy than I would have liked. Definitely was quick to fire up threes, almost as like a point of emphasis, like I'm back. Let me just fucking get in the mix here. But the Clippers look good, you know. And the one thing that I keep thinking of is that they do have a lot of live bodies around the James Harden and now Kawhi combination, where it's just like, so yes, is Kawhi standing in the corner while they're all cutting off of James Harden, pounding the ball at the top of the key because that's what they've been doing for an entire season? Yes, but I almost wonder if it works down the road where if you have the Kawhi option, if you could just swing to one of the best isolation scorers in the past 5 years, like I see it. I keep being optimistic about it.
Yeah.
They blew out the Hawks, who didn't have Jalen Johnson in this game, but you know, they're playing good basketball right now.
Well, Hawks games without Jalen Johnson aren't canon and we don't recognize them. But
That's true.
I agree with you that, yeah, clearly having someone like Kawhi Leonard on the floor is helpful, even if he is just standing in the corner. Where I talk myself in circles is in the overall value of the movement and the cutting that they've established and the identity that they have established, and how clearly he doesn't really fit into that stuff
at all.
And I'm not sure that he ever will. And maybe
he's never
that's
been
fine.
A movement-based player.
Certainly not since like his Spurs era, like
Right.
early Spurs era. It's been a long, long time since Kawhi Leonard was an active, engaged, like moving offensive player without the ball. It's just not really what he does. Maybe that doesn't matter, especially when you think about, they're taking Derrick Jones Jr. out of the starting lineup, and just the threat of Kawhi as a spot-up shooter in the corner versus even Derrick Jones Jr. cutting is pretty dramatically different. And if you can get the defense to tilt it all in a way that benefits James Harden and Norm Powell, great. I think that could be healthy for overall like the balance of their offense. I'm just not sure. I'll give Kawhi credit in this way. Yeah, he wasn't moving super well, and he's clearly not fully actualized. Don't even pass the ball in this guy's direction when he's guarding somebody level of Kawhi. But he doesn't let you get away with easy stuff, like just like easy little entry passes you may throw away, like things that you take for granted. He will pick off and rip from you, and that's true even now with him kind of inching back into form.
Yeah, and even 4 years ago, it was the case that like when he'd come back from injury, like it wasn't like he'd come back and 2 games in, he'd be back to himself. Like it's gonna take some time for him to get used to, to get his wind, to figure out what spots he wants to choose. Like it's going to take him a little while to figure out where he wants to be on the floor on a given possession, and how his body is responding to that. Like, and so, it's one game. I think he's going to figure out a way to be a bigger contributor. I just wonder how much that's going to add to what this overachieving Clippers team is already doing. I don't think this takes them from overachiever to like legit team. I just can't see that for them in their future.
It was pretty stark when Derrick Jones Jr., who he supplanted in the starting lineup, would get into the game and he's running and he's dunking. And he's just like flying through the air practically. And then you cut to like a Kawhi set and he's like waving off in the distance while everybody's like having fun, like doing actions and cutting off the ball. It's just like, it's definitely going to take a while to work him into the mix here. But I don't know. I think that they have something with this team. So we'll see. I still feel pretty bullish. Honestly, I don't know if you guys saw the Lakers this weekend. Like Lakers have also been playing pretty well. They ultimately lost to the Rockets. Men Thompson also flying through the air regularly in that game. But like LA
big
teams are back.
Athleticism gap though between the Lakers and the Rockets, which that's most teams.
1,000,000%.
I feel like the Rockets are just physical and like get after you, and the Lakers are just like old.
I mean, wear you down with these LeBron 3-pointers that he just jacks up. Yeah,
it's just such a stark contrast. But yeah, the Lakers have been better on defense recently. It's a nice development for them.
And in the Justin Verrier honorary, they're in the mix consideration. Like I think they do find themselves in the mix, and maybe we poo-pooed you a little prematurely, JV, on both the Lakers and the Clippers, as much because the Lakers are playing better overall. The Clippers do have something to look forward to, if nothing else, in trying to incorporate Kawhi. And a lot of these other teams that were looking really good in the West at the start of the season have petered out, have had guys who got hurt. Like other than OKC, and I would say to some extent Houston and Memphis with its like mash unit style, those are the 3 teams that have separated themselves. Everyone else has really substantial questions or injuries or gaps they're trying to fill, or like existential crises of varying degrees. And if the Lakers and the Clippers can kind of take that void and take that oxygen at this point in the season, maybe they will end up in the mix as much as they are right now.
Yeah.
I think any sort of incremental improvement at this point in the season is going to distance yourself from a team like the Warriors or the Timberwolves, who are slowly sinking off and fading into the distance, and we're never going to talk about it again.
They're about
Anthony
to fade
Edwards! Hello!
Yeah, they're fading into Bolivian for sure.
Do we have thoughts about Anthony Edwards talking about being 23 years old and being like, I want to fucking shoot? Why are these teams double teaming me? It's a little annoying that I have to be a playmaker so often. I don't
even think he was saying why they do. He's just like, this is
just
my life.
Like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to play this way.
This is a horrible way to live, but like the way our offense is set up is, it's whatever. I think, look, the guy's 23. It is a bit sign of immaturity to be like, the passing shit works, but like, that's not how I want to play. Like that's an immature way to look at it. But
and to chase it with 53 points in a loss to the Pistons is really perfection, I have to say.
Why don't we pause it there, because we'll get to the Wolves on the next pod. I have something cooked up for them.
Oh, please.
Thank you to Isaiah Blakely. Thank you to Ben Cruz. We'll catch you next time on Group Chat on Thursday. See you then.